Good afternoon again. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session. We've got very exciting topic to go over here today, and just very excited to have our speaker, whom we will be introducing here in a moment, and all of you here to participate in today's session. We'll start out after a welcome and some introductions with an overview of what this community of practice is and is a part of. And then we'll get into the heart of the matter today with Felicia Urbina from Familia, who will be sharing more with us about family resource centers and about working with families and communities of speakers other than English or multilingual communities. And we look forward to hearing what Belisa has to share with us today. We'll have some peer sharing and networking as time allows. And then, of course, as we close out, we'll talk about next steps. So as a reminder, we have on the screen what today's topic is. And again, we are just pleased and very excited to be joined by Belisa and presenting on behalf of Familia and the great work that they do as sort of a case study for some of the topics we'll be talking about here today. This topic and what Belisa will be sharing with us relates to the broader statewide child abuse and neglect prevention priority area, increasing awareness of evidence or access to evidence-based or research-informed programs for parenting skills and support that help parents and caregivers understand all stages of their child's development. So there is alignment with that strategy, which is a statewide prevention strategy. For more information about the Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Plan here in Georgia, or the statewide priorities, or just these communities of practice, feel free to visit the homepage for the Georgia Essentials for Childhood Initiative, or to reach out to the email address you see on your screen. I've put this information in the chat just now, as well as the homepage for Familia, so you can follow along and check them out as Belisa is presenting. For a little background on the Georgia Essentials for Childhood Initiative, it's committed to safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments as a core building block for successful and thriving children and youth, families, and ultimately communities and our state. And you can learn more about the working groups and other initiatives of the Georgia Essentials for Childhood at the web address that I shared in the chat. And you can also reach out to the email address I've shared there on the screen. As part of the implementation of Georgia's statewide child abuse and neglect prevention plan, the Essentials Initiative has set up some communities of practice, and that's the broad framework for today's session. They primarily meet twice a year to talk about resources and successes around shared topics, any barriers or challenges people are having related to these topics, and also giving the opportunity for that peer sharing, peer learning around lessons learned and other opportunities. We want to make sure that there's a safe and open space for collaboration and connection, and also to identify and learn about shared topics. So there may be things that seem to resonate with people during today's session that we'll file away and look at holding a future session about. So we're continuing to sort of feed this process through the discussions and the topics of interest that come out in during sessions. I will say that this is not a CEU eligible session. We will not be providing certificates of completions or able to award any sort of continuing education credits or hours. We can, however, provide a statement of attendance if that's needed for your supervisor or any other requirements. If you do require one of those, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll be putting my information in the chat here in a moment. We also support these communities of practice beyond these twice annual sessions through a site that's hosted through the Basecamp platform. This allows for direct communication and connection among practitioners and professionals and community members all over the state for peer support, resource sharing, announcements, and other ways to connect to the greater movement for child and family well-being in Georgia. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about Basecamp, no strings attached, just what's going on? Is this something that'll be worth my time or maybe someone else at my agency or in my community? Feel free to reach out again to that email address, essentials@gsu.edu. Prevent Child Abuse Georgia is one of the backbone organizations of Georgia Essentials for Childhood and is the host of the homepage and resources for the state's Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Plan and Georgia Essentials for Childhood. As a program of Georgia State University, you can see that the domain for the web address of Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, Georgia Essentials for Childhood, and that email address I keep sharing is a gsu.edu address and domain. And that's why just want to explain why you're seeing Georgia State connected to this initiative in this program. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Belisa Urbina from Familia, who's going to be sharing a bit more about what they do and the way that they work with the local communities that they serve.
Thank you very much. So happy to be here and so happy to see many of you that I know and others that I have a connection with. So my plan is to share a little bit about Familia, but then spend the bulk of my time talking about concrete ideas in how do you create a better space, better services, more appropriate services for those individuals and families whose English is not their main language. As you can tell, it is not for me. I am a native Spanish speaker. Therefore, I have this little funky Latino accent. I always jokingly say that I am a Puerto Rican peach. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, but I have been living in Georgia for the last 24 years. So Georgia is home, but it is Puerto Rico as well. So that's probably one of the first ideas that I want to share is that you don't have to choose. And whenever we allow, especially our younger children, to be comfortable with being all of it, with being, Latinos, being from the country that their families came from, and at the same time, feeling that, this is their home. That is always a great opportunity for them to feel more comfortable in their skin. And every study tells us that that helps them be certainly more successful and make better decisions for their future. So let's see if I can. Okay, perfect. So Familia has been working in the Metro Atlanta area for 22 years. My husband and I started it really as a couples program inside of a church, never imagining that we were creating a corporation or any of this that is now. It was really our idea of continue sharing some of the tools and resources that we got in our native Puerto Rico when we got here to Georgia. And then it really exploded in our hands as we were touching areas where there were no services. Almost 23 years ago, the Latino community was growing tremendously as it is now, but there was barely nothing for them. So I guess we came at the right time to be able to be there. What we do is offer preventive family services and then equip Latino families with tools, resources, and skills so that they can move from a moment of crisis, however they define crisis. Some of our clients have very complex situations, and I will talk about that later. Some of them, looking at it from our perspective, might not look as big, but it is certainly big for them. And if it's really a situation that they feel they need help with, that's exactly what we are here for. We currently have 5 offices through the Atlanta metro area in College Park, Kennesaw, Lawrenceville, Norcross, and Smyrna. And then we recently opened an office in Puerto Rico. Everybody is applying for field trips. We are not taking field trips yet, but coming up soon. Last year, Familia served a little bit over 7,000 clients coming from 31 counties in Georgia. So we get people from all areas, even beyond the Atlanta metro area. What is it that makes our system different? What makes Familia different? Really is what we call the Familia model. We always provide services from the optic of a family. However you define the family. We are not here to define who is that nuclear family and who is part of it. You tell us that. But once we identify who that nuclear family is, we want to assess everybody in that family over the age of 12 and then create a program that impacts everybody. We assess everybody over the age of 12, but we serve anyone, even much, much younger than 12. Our idea is really to create a model, a plan that is very much customized to that family. In some cases, that plan is a brief intervention. Other times is a very lengthy process where the family is going to require resources and time on our end, and we are ready to do that. We are ready to walk with that family for however long it takes, because we want them to really, at the end of the process, to be thriving, so that we can start also creating a whole new group, especially among our young people, that are, being volunteers, being leaders of their community. So I think that that's something that we would love to see happen. So then those services are highly coordinated first by a case manager, which is our key piece in all the family plans, but more importantly also with technology. I think that one of the interesting things that we do is that families have only one record. And off of that one record, you might have a domestic violence advocate, you might have a case manager, a family resource centers navigator, you might have an immigration attorney, a psychiatrist, a parenting facilitator. Everybody is working on that one record. What that creates is true collaboration, because everybody is seeing the notes. Then you can send tasks to one another so everybody knows how the family is progressing, and they can support each other. Usually clients are going to create closer relationships, maybe with one staff member as opposed to another. And then, collaboration can happen in identifying resources and supporting each other's services, because at the end, it's just one plan that everybody's working on. So I think that has worked very well for us through the years, and families appreciate just doing one intake process. It might be more involved than others, but then it happens only one time, and then after that, the family is in and everybody's working on their behalf. We do a bunch of programs, all of them in Spanish. We do some services in English for sure, especially when we're working with people that have emergencies or situations that require us to be there on the front line. But for the bulk of our programs, they happen in Spanish. We do parenting classes using the CANPP model. We do have domestic violence programs inside of our support groups that we call them healthy relationships, because they are very much focused in after the situation. How do we really create the skills to make a healthier family? We offer a program that is called How to Avoid Falling for a Jerk or a Jerkette, which is tremendously practical for people. I always like seeing that first session of that program, because people laugh to no end and they really get a lot out of it. We certainly do mental health counseling, assessments and counseling in Spanish, but usually in our case, mental health counseling comes at the end. It's very common that we get a client referred to us for mental health counseling. But what we have learned through the years is that if we spend time on the front end doing a very good assessment of all the members of the family, and then usually we start getting them into that evidence-based group programming. And we will talk a little bit more about the importance of those evidence-based programs. We bring the parents to CANPP, then usually the child might be the main referral coming from the school or DFACS. Then the child is attending, Sparks, which is a group for teenagers. It's a therapy group for teenagers. Then the family together is going to Strengthening Families. If in the end they need mental health counseling, which might not, usually these programs, in coordination work wonders for the family. Then we are able to reserve that mental health clinician for cases that are more complex or where their individual intervention is needed. And I'll tell you in a second why that is important, because it's so scarce. So what we have learned is that by doing that, we are going to not only create better outcomes, we're also going to create outcomes that sustain themselves over the long run, which is what we want in the end. Specifically about CAFE, CAFE is the name that we use for our Family Resource Center. We started the first CAFE on March 2020, right at the onset of the pandemic, and it became a lifeline for our communities. Ser Familia made the decision of staying in person, so we never transitioned any of our services to virtual format. We stayed at the offices every day through the pandemic, and having the opportunity of opening that first Family Resource Center, followed very quickly by the other three. It was really a game-changing opportunities for our families, because families knew that we were there, that we were going to respond. We developed protocols very quickly in how to help families where you had somebody that had, COVID, was COVID positive. Right in the beginning, we didn't know everything that we know now. But we always try to find ways in which families could engage with us, doesn't matter the circumstances. So really, CAFE is a cultural adaptation of the Family Resource Center model. And as Laura shared, it was developed in conjunction with DFACS. We sat together and we put the idea on how are we going to make this work. DFACS supports two of our Family Resource Centers, and we have been identifying additional funding to ensure that every Ser Familia office has a Family Resource Center, because it has become our welcome mat to the community. Families can find, different services that are not the Ser Familia core model of services. What are those? At the cafes, each cafe is different because it responds to the needs and the wishes of the families that it's serving. So our cafe in the area of Suwannee and Lawrenceville looks very, very different from the one in Smyrna or the one in Clayton, because the families are different, their needs are different. The services that are available or not available in that community are different. So usually we always start with a good assessment of the community and really getting to know them, listen to them. What is it that they feel that they need? They are the experts on their own situation. So we are here, first of all, to listen. So at the cafe, some of them have tutoring program, others have piano and art lessons for the kids in the afternoons. One of our cafes have a seniors program. We do financial literacy. We have English as a second language in two of the cafes. Obviously, we include parenting classes. We do emergency financial assistance, concrete supports on all of the cafes. So it's really a place where people can find all of those pieces that they need for a more successful everyday life. Why are we talking about people that speak other language? Why is that an important conversation now? First of all, because our nation is changing. By originally this projection, when it was made some years ago, it said that the US was going to become a minority majority country by 2050. That is going to happen much quicker. Way before 2050, the majority of people in the US will not be white, not Hispanics. And usually when we say that, there are people that get a little bit anxious and, how is that going to look like? In reality, at the end, it's going to be, in my world, diversity is beauty. So I think that our nation becomes richer, becomes better, becomes more when we are all in here, when everybody's allowed to be who they are and bring to the table all of those little differences and nuances that makes each of us unique. Really, the biggest, the community that is growing the biggest is the Hispanic community. The Asian community is growing a lot as well, thankfully, but the fact that they started with a smaller number of members of the Asian community makes it that even though they're growing a lot, their numbers as a percentage of the total population is much, much less than what the Hispanic population is. This growth is not made up by new immigration. This growth is made up by more kids being born in the US and then feeling that they are part of this nation. If you ask, I just told you that we serve more than 8,000 Latinos a year. And I could not remember I'm me asking a Latino about Georgia, about the US, and they not expressing how grateful they feel of being here, how much they want this to be a better place. So I think that in the end, this vibrant young Latino community is bringing a lot to our different communities. Then in Georgia, the Atlanta Regional Commission is telling us that we are going to become much more diverse. Right now, we're about 1 million Latinos, 1.1 million Latinos in the state of Georgia. So think that in, the Metro Atlanta was less than 700,000 in 2015. And it's a lot more in about, 7-8 years. But by 2040, it's going to be 1.75 million Latinos. That's 153% increase. So there's going to be a lot of growth in the Latino community. So we need to look for a second before we start talking about serving people that do not speak English as their main language. Why is cultural competence important? Because many times we assume that by virtue of living in the same community, we really understand the reality of those that belong to, a community that is different from ours. And it is important to understand that there's not a single person that has only one dimension. As I told you, I am Puerto Rican, I feel Latina. At the same time, I love Georgia. I imagine that I will live here the rest of my days. This is the place where my nine grandchildren were born. So I have 9 little Georgians to love. So in the end, everybody's very much multifaceted. And if, as much as we can understand that and really know what to do with that information, we are going to be better services providers. Many times, people rely on that cultural destructiveness or deficit. Everybody has to be the same. The idea that the US is a melting pot. We are not a melting pot. We're a salad bowl. Because a melting pot means that everybody has to become one thing that looks exactly alike. And I like the idea of a salad bowl. If I am tomato, just because that's my favorite veggie, then we'll decide that Laura is asparagus, and then Matthew is lettuce, and then we're going to have all of those pieces in that salad bowl, and we are going to have a community that is richer, that is stronger, instead of just making sure that we chop everybody and make it into something that is exactly alike. So pressuring assimilation, especially for our kids, not necessarily is a good idea. The other side of that coin is fostering acculturation. Acculturation means that I'm going to learn what are the customs and norms here in Georgia, and then I'm going to feel like I am part of it, that I understand, I get with the rest of the community, and we can work together in a manner that is effective. Assimilation will mean that I have to acquire a Southern accent. I think it's beautiful, but it doesn't stick with me. I've been here, I can speak English, but I speak English with my Latino accent because the Southern drawl doesn't stick. So then the cultural blindness is saying, oh, I do not see differences. Everybody's exactly the same. We're not, and it is okay that we're not. Then the awareness is, I know that there are differences, but I do not know what to do with them. I have no knowledge besides seeing the differences. Then you become cultural competent, and really we don't like to use the phrase cultural competence a lot. We use more cultural humility, because I cannot become cultural competent in anybody's culture. I can try to understand, I embrace, I celebrate, I foster, but certainly I will never be competent in any culture, not even the Latino culture, because we are so diverse. But really what we are striving to is to really embrace those differences, viewing differences as a strength, transplanting that knowledge that I have into effective action to serve others, and then being proactive in eliminating those biases and barriers. We all have biases. That's part of being human. But if I know what they are, then I can work to overcome those whenever I'm providing services to an individual or a family. When a family moves to another country, there is going to be a period of decompensation. It is difficult. You make plans, you imagine that things are going to play out in a certain way, and most times they do not. Also, the families that move from other places, they usually leave their human network, their friends and family and social groups in their native country. So they feel, many times very isolated. That's one of the reasons why I think any programming group modality for immigrant communities, they tend to be very successful, especially for Latino families, because they find people with similar challenges, similar opportunities, similar life experiences. And usually the first, class of a 8-week period or a 13-week period, everybody is a little bit shy, but by the third or fourth class, they are BFFs because they had just found people that they can identify with. And, providing programming in a group format helps so much in combating this sense of isolation, which is one of the reasons why many of our families face, instances of depression, because they feel that they don't have that human network and that human connection. So language is important, very important, because relationships happen in a language. And I'm sure Laura and Deborah have heard me say this so many times. Every relationship that I have happens in a language. My husband can speak English, but I will feel so weird talking to him in English because we started dating when we were 16. He just turned 57 and I will turn 57 beginning of next year. We have been together most of our lives. That relationship happens in Spanish. Every major decision is going to happen in Spanish. The other day, I was making fun of my husband and I have 5 children who are not children anymore. They go from 37 to 25, so they are big men and a woman. And I was speaking to one of my sons, and he is the one that moved to Georgia when he was 3 years old. He has no memory of living in Puerto Rico. For him, Puerto Rico is a cool place for vacation, but he has no idea of how it feels to live there. So we were talking about something, and he was telling me that he got very angry at something. The minute he got agitated in the conversation, then Spanish words started flowing. And our conversation was happening in English because my relationship with him happens in English. But as soon as he got upset, it was all Spanish, because that is the language of his feelings. Many times you're going to have people who suffer a moment of trauma or a difficult situation, and even though they might be English dominant, they cannot speak about that instance of trauma in English. They are going to speak about that trauma in the language in which they learn how to express those feelings. So something important as we move forward is the question of, how do I feel working with people who speak with an accent? How do I feel when I have to work with somebody that speaks, to another person in a language that I do not understand? And I'm going to have the impression that they are talking about me. Most of the times, they are not talking about you, because I always tell people that none of us is that important as providers. They are talking about whatever is pertinent for them. In our office, we are a staff of 47, but we have only 2 people that cannot speak Spanish. So I always, hats off to them that they are able to manage themselves in this jungle of people where they speak Spanish, and then we speak Spanish with all sorts of accents, because there are people here from 12 Latin American countries, and we sound in Spanish very different one from the other. So I always, just praise those 2, because they are able to manage, the relationships here, with all of that Spanish flowing around. What is your attitude? How do you feel about that? That is a good question for yourself to ask. In Georgia, about 82% of Latinos and most of the other communities that whose English is not their main language, they speak a language other than English at home. So about, hold on, there you go. No, coming back. No, sorry. Sorry, guys, I made a boo here. Aha, there you go. About 58% of our Latino children, they live with parents who have difficulty speaking English. And about 1 in 4 of our Latino children live in what is qualified as a linguistically isolated home. That means a household in which no one over the age of 14 is able to speak English very well. And this is important to know because sadly, many times I see providers using children as interpreters. That is a bad idea, guys. That is the worst idea ever. That child doesn't have the words or the knowledge to do a proper interpretation. You are giving that child information that he or she should never have. You're putting them in a position of power in that family. That child will never act as a child again. They are the ones ruling the home. And I'll tell you a quick story. Recently, I was attending as an observant in one of our Sparks, the therapy group for teenagers sessions. And this child was saying that he went with his mom to a doctor's appointment. And he was asked to serve as an interpreter. Awful idea. So the doctor tells mom that she has a medical condition. He did not specify what it was. And he decides that he was not going to tell mom. Why? Because he's also the one that keeps the budget. He knows there's no money for mom's treatment. So he decides that he is not going to burden mom with this information. Nobody else is going to know. Doctor doesn't speak Spanish. Mom doesn't speak English. So this 15-year-old is carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. No wonder we have so many of our kids with depression and anxiety. And you bet that as soon as he has an opportunity of leaving school to come and work so that he can provide for mom's treatment, that is what is going to happen. So many times we do not understand the gravity of putting a child in the position of being an interpreter. So when you have people who are limited English proficiency, English is not their main language. First of all, you have to establish strong partnerships and working relationships with other organizations. And you need to figure out who they are. What do they provide? What do they bring to the table? Are they really serving that community in a manner that is effective? You have to hire staff that has the correct cultural and linguistic proficiency. Many times you can have someone that speaks the language, but they do not understand the culture. There are other times that you have people that understand the culture, but they do not speak the language. And you need to make sure that if you are bringing people that do not speak English to your door, to your program, you are going to provide them more than a paper translated to Spanish. And I say this with a heavy heart because we get requests to translate documents day in and out. We do not provide that service. But we're always happy to help if we can in doing something minor for an agency. But then my question is always, okay, when I give you this flyer in Spanish, what is going to happen when that non-English speaker shows up to your door asking for help? What are you going to do? Because you cannot go farther than that flyer, in Spanish or any other language that you're asking me to translate it to. So we have to make sure that we can really serve those families beyond the fact that I can say some words, that I learned a little bit of Spanish while I was in school, that I have these documents that are in Spanish. It goes way beyond that. If you cannot serve them, who is out there that can? Create a referral list that is appropriate for that community, taking into consideration that not every Latino speaks Spanish. We have Latinos and Brazilians that speak Portuguese. And we also have 13 Mayan dialects identified in Metro Atlanta. What is it really the language that family is speaking? What is their main language? What is the language that they do understand? So when you're working on creating a referral list, make sure that wherever you're referring that family, they have the services available, and also that they are able to serve people that might be undocumented, that might live on a mixed status family, because it's very normal that most of our Latino families, and it happens in other cultures as well, happens also in in African communities that we have in Metro Atlanta and in Asian communities, where the kids might be documented, but then the parents are not. So in those mixed status families, also there's a lot of considerations to be had. Understand your community's realities. What happens in your community, especially immigration laws, policies, and issues. Two things here. The first one is that you have to take the time, if you're going to open a new service or a new project, to sit down and listen. We are putting together along with the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, a very large project in a community called Fair Oaks. Fair Oaks is located about 2 miles from Smyrna. That is one of the most under-resourced Latino communities in the state. We have been serving Fair Oaks forever because our Smyrna office has been there for many years, and most of the families we serve out of that office come from Fair Oaks. What we are doing at Fair Oaks initially is doing a family resource center, but we jokingly internally call it a cafe on steroids because it is a big project. We are going to add services in that family resource center that we don't have in any of the others. It's going to be a fairly large undertaking. Before even attempting to do that, even though we have been in that community for 23 years, we sat down with families, with principals. We did, opportunities where we went to the mobile home parks, to the schools. We did more than 1,500 assessments before we even sat down and put the first sentence on that piece of paper to make a plan. What are the situations that make Fair Oaks unique, that are different from the families that I serve in Norcross, that come mainly from Gwinnett and DeKalb? What are the immigration laws, the policies and issues? That community has suffered one of the most traumatic experiences that I have ever seen. Years ago, about 12, 13 years ago, one of the high schools, they have a very large Latino population. Fair Oaks have schools where the kids are 80% and 90% Latino, so it's heavily Latino community. The principal put together a PTA meeting geared towards the Latino parents, and they responded. They came, they were happy to engage, and as they were leaving the school that night, immigration was blocking every exit, and they took 82 parents that night. That has created a fallout and a sense of distrust and fear that has been 12 to 13 years, and we're still dealing with that because people remember. So when we go and serve in Fair Oaks, we need to know that history, because that history is going to determine many things that we do and how we do them, because we have to acknowledge that historical trauma of that community. Ask specific questions about what are the stressors of families and individuals in that community. Also respect the language, the choices that the family wants to do when it comes to language. Do they prefer to speak in Spanish? We now serve families that speak Mayan dialects. I do not have interpreters for Mayan dialects. Difficult. We have an agreement with the Guatemalan and Salvadorian consulates, and they provide support if they have it for situations of emergencies. I have learned to sit down and allow the family to have a conversation in whatever dialect they feel more comfortable discussing, and then coming back to us and telling me what they believe, what they think, if they agree with the idea. But I don't hear any of their discussions, and that's very unusual for us that are so used to serving clients that speak the language that we understand. But we have to respect that. That's the language that they feel very comfortable with. Also pay attention to the literacy level of that individual, in their native language. Many times people say, oh, I think that people should learn English. Absolutely agree. But is everybody able to learn English? Most times they don't. Not because they don't want to, many times because they don't wish to do it. Many of our families, they work 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have a time to go to school. Many times our families did not go to school in their native countries. So their literacy level in Spanish is very low. How I'm going to impose of them the burden of having to learn English when it is so difficult for them even to communicate in Spanish? I need to know, when my families are not able to properly read or write, or if they need some support with that, so that I create some systems before they show up at my door. So whenever I am confronted into that situation, nobody flusters. Everybody acts very naturally, very respectfully, and we already have a plan ready to go to make sure that there's not a single hiccup, and the fewer amount of people, if it's a group program, realizes that that person is not able to read or write, respecting that person's integrity and their own situation. So many times people might not feel okay saying no to you, because for most of the clients that we serve, especially if they come from certain places in Latin America or certain places in Asia, saying no directly is a sign of disrespect. So you're going to tell them something and they're going to go, and in their head, they're going like, that's not what we want to do. But they're not going to tell you that. You have to, first of all, gain their trust. And also, for us, the big thing is always avoid as much as we can yes or no questions. So we always use open-ended questions. We engage people in conversation. We listen. And from that conversation, we're going to figure out if they're agreeing with us or they are not. So sometimes we want people to go to the point. And that is a skill that you acquire. It took me years to know how to be direct. And if this conversation was happening in Spanish in a different group, my approach would be very different. Now I speak in bullet points because I'm doing a presentation in English. A presentation in Spanish does not happen this way. It's very conversational. It's different. We use more words. So that idea of what's on your mind, go to the point, is an American expression, and it is okay. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's perfectly fine, but it's different for us. It takes a time for us to learn that skill and to really be able to respond in a manner that is more concise. Respect those cultural values. Many times, you are going to have to include grandparents in the conversation. And you ask yourself, I would never allow my mother or my mother-in-law to be involved in this, but that is, what is respect for them? What is the value for them? You seek to understand. You don't have to agree with the client's choices. As long as it's not endangering anybody, there's nothing that could be dangerous or inappropriate or illegal. Many times you don't have to agree with their choices. You just need to understand them and respect them. So when we use evidence-based programs, and Familia uses many of them, from selecting, which assessment tools to use to do assessments on different things, from mental health to, social connections. We always try to find an evidence-based tool as much as we're able to. So those evidence-based tools, make sure that you understand the needs of the families, what are the outcomes that you plan to achieve, and how that program or tool can help you in those two goals. Make sure that that tool or program has not only been translated, but also acculturated. And I'll give you an example. I just told you that in our office, we have people from 12 different Latin American countries. Sometimes it's a joke whenever we try to put something in writing and circulate that through the office. If you don't take the time of making sure that everybody reads it beforehand and understand what they are saying, we have had the most hilarious exchanges when people get different messages from the same words. Because in different places in Latin America, the same word might mean something different, from something funny to something very offensive. So we always make sure that if we're putting it out there, we're circulating that and everybody's able to read it and see it as like, yep, somebody from my country will understand it. So that happens also with the evidence-based programs. Have they been acculturated properly? Are they designed in a manner that somebody, what is the usual education level that most of the adults that I serve? How far they went in school? What is the reading level? Does that program account for that? Would that be appropriate for them? Then you can select that. Also, make sure that you select the right messenger. Sometimes all the difference, is made when you have the right person delivering the content. If it's an evidence-based program, you have to replicate that program with fidelity, making sure that you are doing it the right manner so that in the end, you can make sure if the outcomes are being achieved or not. But it makes a difference if the person that is delivering the program is able to express themselves in a manner X or manner Y. Would it be better for this program to be presented, if possible, by a man as opposed to a woman because of the audience? Try to think of all the possibilities that would make that program more effective, making sure that you protect the fidelity of the program, but also all of those little nuances enhance the possibility. When you're using an assessment tool, how are you doing that assessment? Considering the families that I serve, would it be better if I give them an iPad? Or would it be better if I have somebody to sit with them and ask them the questions privately? We use the adverse childhood experiences, the ACE, for anybody that comes to the agency for any service. So we do thousands upon thousands of those every year. And about 5 years ago, we started giving the ACE to anybody over the age of 13. So we have a lot of ACEs that are done by teenagers, and we have gotten a lot of very valuable information, and it helps inform many of the decisions that we made, because that ACE, is tremendously important for the work that we do. But for many people, it is daunting. You're asking 10 tremendously personal questions, coming many times from a stranger in a situation that feels a little bit unnerving. So how do you are going to administer that ACE? Is it going to be different from this population to the other? Would it make difference on the results if you administer the ACE in a different manner? All of those are questions that you have to ask yourself and make sure that you are organizing and planning for that program in the proper manner. So really quickly, one of the things that we have here in Georgia is that we have serious gaps in services. And I'm here talking about, services in Spanish, but it's the same for other languages that are non-English. In Georgia, we have less than 100 Spanish-speaking fully licensed mental health professionals, and that takes into account counselors, licensed clinical social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. Imagine there's 1.1 million Latinos in the state. Almost none of the domestic violence shelters in Metro Atlanta nor the community service boards have consistent services in Spanish. And many of them, they do not have even staff members that can speak Spanish. A lot also is being said about providing counseling via an interpreter. If there's no other option, that's what it is. But I have to tell you something. When you say, I am doing counseling via an interpreter, there are two very important considerations. First of all, the client is going to create an empathy, a relationship with the interpreter, not the professional, because the one that is speaking their language is the interpreter. And usually that interpreter changes, from one, session to another. So then you're going to have to start that relationship over every time. Second, if you are doing a counseling session via an interpreter, you're not doing an hour or 45 minutes. You are doing, if it's an hour, the best you can strive for is 30 minutes because everything has to be said twice. But considering that the interpreter takes a second to think about it, say the whatever it is in the other language, usually what the national average of a session that is done via an interpreter is between 20 to 21 minutes. So those of you that are mental health professionals, is that an appropriate time for a counseling session? Most of you are going to tell me, no, it's not. It's too short. So that is one of the many shortcomings that a session done via an interpreter has. So why is it now more important than ever what we are doing? After the pandemic, we are facing a crisis, and I'm just preaching to the choir. Especially in the Latino community, our children and youth, because of those responsibilities that I already alluded to, because there were not enough services, because they carry, they are put in a position of power in their families. All of that, what creates is that about 43% of our Hispanic students, feel sad or hopeless. That is way more than any other child in the US. About 23% of our Latino teens in Georgia before the pandemic had a suicide plan. That number for youth that are either Black or white is 11%. So our children are more than double that. Then after the pandemic, we are seeing as an agency, and this is a number that we have been sharing with other agencies to see if it's unique to us, but sadly it's not. If we were seeing about 25% of the kids with suicidal ideation prior to the pandemic, now it's about 62%. And we do not have enough services and hands to be able to account for that, the enormity of the numbers. That's why we started a group therapy modality, because we could not help all the kids on a one-on-one basis. We are seeing about double the number of cases of domestic violence. And sadly, we see, since we do those reports quarterly, we use Salesforce, so we have dashboards that come out every Monday. So we see in real time things, and we see the ebbs and flows. But, once again, you see quarter after quarter, and it gets a little bit better one quarter, and then it explodes again the quarter after. And then when it comes to cases of sexually abused children, we're seeing about 3 times. Last quarter, we saw in cases of children who have been physically abused, more than what we see on 2018, the whole year. So the numbers are really mind-blowing. We have done a lot of things to try to counter that, from what I just tell you of putting in place this Sparks program with Emory, so that we could see more teenagers, increase the number of healthy relationship support groups, parenting classes, double the number of case managers, hire new cafe navigators. But even with that, everybody is stretched to the max. So this is the addresses of our offices. You can reach us via social media, via our website. Always happy to connect with you if we could be of any assistance, and very grateful for the opportunity of talking to you. And if we have any minutes for some questions, Matthew, you're the boss there.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This has been just so tremendous, and we've had some people contributing in the chat, and certainly people as they've come on off camera with head nods and recognition of how some of these things you've said have resonated and connected, and we've seen it in our own work, and also ways that there have been new things that we hadn't thought about in this way. I know that's important. We do have one question that's already been shared in the chat, so we'll get to that. Katie had earlier in the presentation was interested in Familia's services and whether any of them are available via telehealth or other virtual opportunities, or does everyone need to come into the office for your various services?
Usually they do come to the office, but usually what we do is do that assessment at the office. Then, depending on where the family lives, there are some services that can be done via telehealth. And also we do a lot of services in the community. Many of the groups that we do, people do not come to our office. We go to spaces. Currently, we are doing 2 parenting programs in schools. We are doing 1 healthy relationships inside of a church. And I think we also have an Nuestra Alcanza, the couples program, inside another church. So a lot of counties outside of Metro invite us to their communities, and we do services at their spaces whenever possible. We can certainly connect with us because we have done services out of the state of Georgia. So it's not like we are, if we have the bandwidth, if we have the capacity, we can do that. And also there's other opportunities in which we can connect with family. In many cases, especially cases of domestic violence victims, we provide transportation via Uber. So there's opportunities that we can organize services. So feel free to connect with us so I can connect you with the programs team and then see how we can support you. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate connecting with all of you.
With that, thank you again for joining here today. On behalf of the backbone organizations of Georgia Essentials for Childhood, it's been my pleasure to be your host today. Belisa, thank you again for your time. Thanks to everyone here who's joined us.